Okay, today we're talking about the coordinate system, and we really did a lot of vocab today on the coordinate system, so I'm going to review that vocab on the video today. The first thing we talked about, that this is a coordinate system. Coordinate system is when we have two number lines, one going horizontally, one going vertically, that intersect, and we use it to graph things. Okay. First thing you do when you're creating a coordinate system, you need to remember that the x-axis is the one that goes horizontally, and we always label the x-axis down on the right-hand end, and the number line going up and down is called the y-axis, and that is always labeled up at the top. Also, you'll notice that all of the ends of the lines have arrows on them. It's very important when you're creating a coordinate system, you draw one, you always put the arrows on the end because these lines do continue to go on forever. So we need to show that. Okay, the other thing to remember when labeling a coordinate system, you must mark what you're counting by on here, your scale. Okay, positives go to the right and up, negatives go to the left and down. And you notice that you have to count by the same amount, both going to the right and to the left on the x-axis, and you must count by the same amount going up and down on the y-axis. Now, you'll notice to the right-hand side, every line is labeled. To the left, only every other is labeled. And that's okay, because if this is -2 and that's -4, then this line would have to be -3. So I'm still counting every line as a 1. I'm just not labeling them to make it look nicer and look a little bit neater. But you always have to count by the same amount all the way across and by the same amount all the way up and down. And they can be different. So I can count by 2s on my x-axis and count by 5s on my y-axis. That's okay. But most of them will do. We can count by the same amount on each. But it's okay either way. Now, some more definitions here. This point where they intersect, right there, is called the origin. And the origin is the 0 on both of these number lines. On the x-axis it's 0, on the y-axis it's 0. So we call that the origin. Now you notice that this is broken into 4 different sections, and we call those the quadrants, and they're labeled with Roman numerals. The top right here is quadrant number 1. The top left is quadrant number 2. The bottom left is quadrant number 3. And the bottom right is quadrant number 4. Now, sometimes on a homework assignment or a quiz or something, they would ask you what is to describe the location of a point in the coordinate system. And when they say to describe the location, all they're asking you to do is to name which quadrant that point is in. Okay? Now, speaking of points, when we're looking at points on a graph, they are labeled or named by 2 numbers, which is called an ordered pair. And an ordered pair always looks like this. It has 2 numbers separated by a comma inside of parentheses. And those ordered pairs tell us where a point is graphed. The first number is always your x-coordinate. So in other words, it tells you where to go along the x-axis. The second number is always the y-coordinate. So that tells us how far up or down to go on the y-axis to get to our point. So if I'm graphing this point 3, 2, the x always comes first. So I know that's a 3. So I'm going to go over 3. And then the y value is a +2. So I'm going to go up 2. And that is where that point would be located. Now, I normally would name this point with a capital letter so that on the graph I could put that capital letter by it and know that those match. So if I want the point -4, -3, that tells me I'm going to the left first because that's my x over -4. And then I'm going down because my y is negative to negative 3. And this would be that point. So if I called that B, this would be point B. And that is in the third quadrant. Okay, this one was in the first quadrant. So if I wanted the coordinates of this point, that would be negative 3, 5. So C would have the coordinates negative 3, 5. And that's how I graph points or take coordinates off a graph. And that is it for today.